this table a little more towards you, because in that way I can see the clock.
Whatever you need. But I don't know if it's heavy or it's...
Yeah, where is it?
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of blocked by...
Oh, yeah, I can't see it at all. But that's all right, I've got a watch.
Good. Yeah, if I pick them up,
We actually have to
microphone.
So are we sharing?
passing it.
Yeah. Okay, we can.
Okay, we share.
So we're just missing one.
Well, maybe there was one stop working, so. But Manu and I can share it.
That's it.
If it works.
Yeah, it's working. Did we meet in Geneva? Maybe.
You were in Geneva, right?
I've been to Geneva a lot. I haven't worked there.
Because I worked for GICH here, but this was back in 2006,
I
2008.
don't think.
Long time.
I did in 2006. I was doing a lot with the smaller survey. So we might have bumped into each other
Maybe one of the conferences.
at a conference or something.
It's also a long time.
My memory for 20 years ago is not good.
I think it actually looks like we're ready to go. Welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the conventional arms control panel here. I was really struck by some of the big picture notes that were highlighted in the nuclear arms control theme, because they look so similar to the couple of bullet points that I prepared to introduce this panel. So, if we're just looking at the big picture, you see so many similar challenges in the conventional side as in the other forms of arms control. So technologically, we're seeing a lot of change, rapid change, in how weapons can be or could be designed, produced, tracked, and deployed. And at the same time, the verification approaches that maybe theoretically could be unlocked by this technological change hasn't really caught up yet at the same rate. On the political side, we're seeing the erosion of some of the core treaties and political instruments of conventional arms control, just as it was for nuclear arms control. And then fundamentally, all of this is taking place in a global political dynamic in which many of the key actors are prioritizing armaments in the pursuit of their own security rather than cooperative solution towards limiting the acquisition of weapons and their proliferation. So in this panel, we're going to be exploring what role Europe, since we are sitting here in Brussels, can play in upholding the existing conventional arms control architecture and in developing new approaches that could be feasible and effective in today's political and technological age. We have an absolutely wonderful panel here to talk us through their perspectives. We will begin the presentations with, immediately to my right, with Mr. Manuel Martinez Morales, who is the Senior Political Affairs Officer in the Conventional Arms Program at the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. He has worked at UNIDIR and other places in the past, and has a specialization in urban violence, and weapons and ammunition management, and diversion prevention. After that, to his right, going down the line here, we have Dr. Nick Marsh, who's a senior researcher at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. Just as we were chatting on stage, I was noting how he has a delightfully eclectic research portfolio, mostly focused on various aspects of arms control, arms trade, and defense industries. And then we will move to my immediate left with Juliana Buzzi, who's the Regional Cooperation Specialist for Southeast Asian and Eastern Europe, the clearinghouse for the control of small arms and light weapons. This is where you notice that I am not a conventional arms control guy by background, so some of the longer phrases will come out rather awkwardly, and that was one of them. But Juliana has worked in the Western Balkans on anti-personnel mines in particular, and has a lot of really interesting experience there that she'll draw on in her presentation. And then finally, we have with us the very head of the Arms Trade Treaty Secretariat, Ms. Karina Solmirano, who has a long and distinguished career that included the government of Argentina, the OAS, and leadership position at a variety of key non-governmental organizations. So to kick off the proceedings, I've encouraged, but not demanded from each speaker, that they share their perspective on three aspects of this issue as I see it. One is, what is the big picture generally? What is the state of conventional arms control? And then taking advantage of some of the great detailed expertise that we have available to us, what are some of the current developments that we're seeing in the topics and geographies covered and followed by the people represented on the panel here? And what are some of the future implications of that? And then finally, what can Europe do to shore up and strengthen some of these measures in conventional arms control? Before I stop talking, just a brief note on the order of operations here. First, as I mentioned, we will go in the order in which speakers were presented in the program, and this is sort of the table setting exercise. Then I will find some threads to pull on, some links to click in the initial presentations by the speakers that will help me formulate the follow-on question. And we'll do that in reverse order of presentation. And then we will finally open the floor to all of you and have a discussion up here about that. So with absolutely zero further ado, Manu, take it away.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for the introduction, very kind, and for the organizers for the invitation, and also my fellow colleagues here in the panel. Let me begin with the big picture. I think conventional arms control, similarly to the conversations that we had earlier today on nuclear aspects, face the same complex challenges. And the challenges in conventional arms control are not abstract. I would say they are deeply, deeply rooted in the realities of conflict, governance, but also development. And in that sense, I think there are three main areas that I want to flag in terms of the big picture challenges. The first one is the conflicts that we are experiencing now. Those that are sending big shock waves across the geopolitical landscape and the conventional arms control architecture. And those are, of course, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan. These crises are not only big in terms of the impact in lives affected, but also the fact that some of them are contributing to the erosion of some of the humanitarian treaties that we rely on. The Mine Ban Convention, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and this, of course, is particularly relevant for Europe because this is where these norms were born and where these norms must be defended. On top of that, apart from the big conflicts, we see in other regions that the absence of strong institutions and weak state presence creates certain vacuums that armed groups fill very quickly. And this is the case, for example, of Haiti, the Sahel, and many areas affected by Boko Haram or Somalia, for example. And then the third key aspect that I would say is places where increased and rapid urbanization is undermining governance and fueling violence, which have increased both the levels of violence, but also the perception of violence. And this is mainly the case in Latin America and the Caribbean, where violence is connected to illicit economies, thriving of drug trade or illegal mining, for example. But in all these settings, in the three of them, the flow of arms and ammunition intensifies the damage and the human cost. So this is the bad news. It's complex, it's difficult. But I think we agreed at the beginning of the panel that we were trying to lift a little bit the audience and talk about the positive things. So there are reasons for cautious optimism in conventional arms control. And I'm going to focus on, let's say, my experience with UNODA in two of the frameworks that we've seen important progress in the last 2 years. So in 2023, we had very good progress with the adoption of the global framework on through-life conventional ammunition management. And this new instrument was adopted filling, let's say, decades-long gap. Ammunition has not only been considered the oxygen of conflict, but also the orphan of conventional arms control, because there was no regulatory instrument specifically dedicated to it, addressing diversion, unplanned explosions, and the risks that these two issues came to. So that adoption by the General Assembly in a consensus-based negotiation was really positive, and that was reinforced this year in June with a preparatory meeting for the first meeting of states that will take place in 2027. Then the other main instrument in conventional arms control that has seen quite a good progress from ODA perspective is the program of action on small arms and light weapons. And in 2024, last year, the review conference chaired by Costa Rica delivered a robust and consensual outcome document as well, with different aspects being covered. One, the convening or the mandate to convene a new open-ended technical expert group to look at the manufacturing technology and design, so how technology affect manufacturing of small arms and light weapons, but there was also remarkable progress on, let's say, classic aspects of this instrument, which deals with marking, record keeping, and tracing, and how the ITI can be better prepared to improve tracing and address diversion as well. So maybe I can focus on why this progress is happening, or why I think this is happening. And I see three key drivers to this, or three key reasons. First, something that was mentioned this morning, the nature of this instrument is important, of these two instruments may be playing a role into it. These are not legally binding treaties, but they are universal instruments or frameworks containing political commitments. And there is certain flexibility in these instruments that allow for broadest participation, but also agreement and progress on implementing the commitments, even in times of very difficult tensions between states. These are at the global level, but at the same time, these issues are complemented with, let's say, either legally binding instruments at the regional level or roadmaps or programs that contribute to implementation, and these are gaining traction in many regions, in Eastern Europe, in the different sub-regional mechanisms in Africa, and also in Latin America and the Caribbean. So the nature and the architecture is helping. The second reason, or the second key driver that I see, relates to where the center of gravity of these instruments lay. And what we see in the last decade is that these instruments are gearing towards implementation. They are really states are making an effort to design implementation mechanisms within these instruments that focus on international assistance, cooperation mechanisms, and how to transfer technical knowledge. So under the program of action, for example, states have agreed to develop a comprehensive training program, a fellowship training program, to build capacity and to use this bottom-up approach to make cooperation more tangible and effective. But interestingly, it's also introducing an aspect of practicality in the multilateral negotiation. These are tangible outcomes that a big number of member states would like to see, would like to they would like to see it becoming a reality, and because of that, they can work in the negotiations to make that happen and use that to also as bargaining chips in the negotiation, and that is helping making good progress. This also happens with other aspects of the instruments, like global assistance mechanisms or funding mechanisms for assistance. And the third one that I will share is leadership matters. I think states are willing to commit, or some states are willing to commit into a leadership role, and we've seen coalitions of committed states. There was a very big example with Germany leading the global ammunition framework process, assisted and really receiving a lot of support from, let's say, states that can bridge the differences between states, and we saw that with the role that South Africa, Brazil, Switzerland have played in the negotiations. So that, I think, covers a little bit the big picture. And I will get into a little bit onto the new and evolving challenges that I see. The first one, the changing nature of warfare that we see, in particular in Ukraine, and the blurring line between the use of drones, ammunition, and IEDs is something to take into account. We also see the issue of volume of arms production, which I think tells us, or at least at the UN, we want to see or rethink what we mean by security, and this is really reflected in the new Secretary General study that was published on the security that we need. It's called Rebalancing Military Expenditure for a Sustainable and Peaceful Future. I really encourage everyone to take a look at the study because it comes with a lot of practical recommendations on how to rethink security, and we've been talking about rethinking security a lot today. And finally, in terms of developments, the decentralization of weapons illicit production, it's a big problem coming, in particular the issue of 3D printing of small arms. It's something that started in North America, quickly evolved into cases in Europe, and now we're seeing popping up in Latin America, the Caribbean, and places in Asia. So it's something to be concerned about. I think I'll stop here. I talked a lot already, and I'm sure my colleagues will enjoy also some time. So back to you.
Thank you so much. On to Nick.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alex. And I guess to quote Monty Python, and now for something completely different. I want to talk, especially because it's the final session before the dinner, and some of you may have been had a very long day. So I wanted to sort of try to provoke some thinking, and that would be on opportunities for conventional arms control agreements between Russia and Europe, European states, or the EU, however that might seem. Now, obviously, the state of conventional arms control as such in Europe is pretty dire. I really don't feel I need to go into that for very long. And also, I share the pessimism that was stated in the last session about, given the regime in Moscow, whether at the moment sort of conventional arms control talks would be fruitful. So I'm going to give you some sort of blue skies thinking in terms of, okay, let's say that there is quite a major change in Russia at some point in the future. Then we can think about, okay, what opportunities might there be for conventional arms control? And the reason to think about that, if there is such an opening in the future, is firstly because conventional arms control is probably easier than nuclear arms control. It's something that could be begun. You could get results possibly fairly quickly in some areas. And secondly, As was mentioned actually in one of the opening presentations, conventional arms control could be linked to the implementation of a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. Again, we're not looking at a peace agreement within the very near future, but we can hope that there might be one. And then we can also think about conventional arms control helping to secure that peace agreement. So then, okay, here's some suggestions to think about over dinner. And I should say that I haven't just plucked these out of thin air now. These are part of the outcomes of a project that a colleague of mine worked on last year on prospects for arms control in Europe. So one avenue might be regional limitations on the deployment of certain conventional arms. For example, we can imagine in the future a Black Sea security regime, and part of that could be limitations on naval forces deployed in the Black Sea. This would seem to be a region which is fairly discrete, and a region in which there has been a lot of fighting, obviously, and destruction, in particular of the Russian Navy, and also a region in which it is absolutely vital that there is free trade of food exports out of the Black Sea region to the rest of the world. So, for example, within such a naval limitation treaty, why not end the deployment of submarines in the Black Sea? That might be something that could be negotiated, might be something that all parties could agree upon. And certainly, if you're worried about Turkey, obviously it could deploy its submarines in the Mediterranean. Similarly, there might be similar opportunities for a regional agreement on deployment of conventional arms, particularly naval forces in the Baltic Sea. Probably much more difficult to come about than the Black Sea, but worth thinking about. Secondly, if we're looking specifically at the implementation of a peace agreement, one aspect of that could be no-fly zones or non-deployment zones for aircraft, fighter aircraft, etc., in parts of Ukraine, parts of Western Russia. Again, something that could be negotiated in the context of a cessation of fighting and something designed to preserve the peace. Secondly, in the advent of such a peace agreement, there would be a need for a focus upon humanitarian disarmament, particularly cooperation over the clearance of mines, clearance of explosive remnants of war. And that might also be an opportunity to try to revitalize the Ottawa Convention concerning the prohibition of anti-personnel mines. And again, the undermining of the Ottawa Convention was mentioned earlier as well. And perhaps there might be some opportunities, again, within the context of a scenario in which there's a peace agreement. And then there could also be, in a wider sense, there might be opportunities for negotiations on new technology. Lots of people have been mentioning AI, use of AI in weapons. Again, in the context of a different international environment, that might be an area in which there could be meaningful negotiations. But of course, if we're talking about conventional arms control in Europe, we think back to this CFE treaty. And so in terms of a much more wider European agreement on conventional forces, obviously Alex will get very annoyed if I was to try and go into huge amounts of detail on that, as I just have a few minutes. So I'll just mention a few points that to consider about the prospect of such a Europe-wide agreement. Firstly, it would probably have to include the whole of Russia. Simply looking at Russia west of the Urals, I think experience has showed there isn't really much point to that. Russia was able to move huge quantities of equipment around the country in from the east of Russia. So just limiting such an agreement geographically, as I said, may not make much sense. There would also, it seems that a previous strategy of limiting the size of exercises also may not make much sense, just in terms of what Russia did in the Zapad exercises was to synchronize lots of little exercises to have one great big one. So it seems that trying to limit the size of exercises, that may not be so useful. When we're looking at the types of equipment, ground forces and artillery ceilings would seem to be some of the most important to focus upon. But they probably need to look at production capacity as well as just unit numbers. Firstly, if we're concerned about Russia in the future, it has burnt through a large proportion of the units it inherited from the Soviet Union. So then the concern, excuse me, the concern in a lot of capitals is about, okay, how quickly can Russia reconstitute its armed forces? And therefore, production capacity appears to be key. And also production capacity is something that is relatively easy to monitor, to verify. Tank production plants, artillery production plants are large and unmistakable. And then a couple more points on missiles. Again, missiles get a lot of attention. They have played a very important role, but there's complications there. Firstly, what about the definitions? Excuse me. We've seen anti-aircraft missiles, S-300s, being used in a land attack role, and also much more widespread. There's been large numbers of loitering munitions, drones, which have had a purpose very similar to a missile. So trying to have a definitional boundary between what we're calling a missile, what we're calling a drone, what we're calling a loitering munition is going to be very difficult, and therefore difficult to work out force ceilings. It may be necessary then to just focus on specific types of missiles. Obviously, hypersonic missiles have received a lot of attention. That may be a starting point. And also, finally, perhaps tactical air forces are less important than people thought. Certainly in Ukraine, air power hasn't had the dominant role which people expected it would do before the war. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Going on to Juliana, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, and indeed, thank you very much for the invitation in this, I think it's a very interesting already conference. I'll try to go back to the optimistic prospects, but try to contribute also to the questions that you posed earlier, with some very concrete experience from Southeast Europe, from the Western Balkans, bringing here some of the challenges that this region is facing, but also some of the concrete measures that the region has been taking in this regard. And I think it's good that, Manuel, you started, because what I will provide is like mirrors exactly what you were saying at the global level, actually at the regional level. But firearms are still posing a threat in the Western Balkans, many of you know, and this is also because of like various reasons, and this includes also the legacy of the arms conflicts, of the past conflicts, prevalence of, let's say, organized crime, persistence of domestic violence, and the use of firearms in domestic violence throughout the regions, let's say, gaps or weaknesses in implementation of related to small arms and light weapons control. And these have contributed throughout the years to high rates, let's say, of gun ownership, in particular in illegal possession, but also of their misuse. And what I want to also provide, in particular, when it comes to the measures that this region is taking, I want to mention it. I want to do it also on behalf of what you mentioned, Southeast Europe, clearinghouse for the control of small arms and light weapons. And I'm mentioning it because CSAC has a very specific mandate with the support of European Union since 2002. But with the specific mandates from the governments of the region, actually, is providing the support in the arms control efforts to the Western Balkans, but also beyond the Western Balkans. Some of the, if I can mention some of the key numbers, just for you also to have a better understanding of the challenge that the region is actually facing. Based on the data from our armed violence monitoring platform, there were at least almost 3,500 incidents recorded in the Western Balkans in Southeast Europe in 2024. Even though 51% of these were strictly related to weapon seizures, which is also, as we call it, a positive incidence, because this also is a demonstration of the efforts of the law enforcement in seizing weapons that have been either in illegal possession or been misused. But almost 120 people have been killed by firearms throughout the region, and 55 of them committed suicides with firearms. And these are figures that show actually the challenge that this region is facing. And if I mentioned the types of incidents, I mentioned the weapon seizures, but these are also a part of, let's say, public disputes, incidents in criminal context, incidents in domestic violence, accidental shootings, celebratory shootings, which is another issue faced by the region. But even though in numbers, incidents either in criminal context or in public disputes are higher in the annual figures, the number of victims in the context of domestic violence with firearms in the region is the highest. So it really shows about the challenge that the region is facing in this regard, in particular when it comes to internal security. If I mention some of the risks, I think it will go along of what Manuel was mentioning earlier, but the region, as a specificity, I think it suffers also from large stockpiles. In the last decades, it has suffered from a large stockpile of weapons as a legacy of past conflicts or past regimes. It's also another key risk is the illegal trade of firearms, ammunition, and explosives, and it is known that the Western Balkans has been let's say, both a region of source, but also as a transit when it comes to firearms. To a lesser extent, also, there's risk coming from conversion of non-lethal weapons to firearms, as well as illicit manufacturing of firearms, but also diversion from the legal stockpiles. Whether these are stolen from the, let's say, from the storages of armed forces or law enforcement, even though this is in the recent years in a much lesser extent. Also, the new conflicts or new wars, in particular, for example, the recent one in Ukraine, have their impact also on the region, because these influence also the demand for firearms, the type of weapons that is also demanded in the region, whether during the conflict or these will be influencing also the demand after the post-conflict as well. And it was mentioned earlier, of course, it's the new technologies as well. More and more we are talking about 3D printed firearms, about weaponized drones, but also the trafficking of firearms through the darknet, so cybersecurity, etc. So what is the region? What has the region been doing to tackle all these threats? In 2018, with the support of European Union, Germany and France, key support, the Western Balkans actually agreed to commit to a regional document with concrete and common targets and goals. Goals that are covering all the functional areas of arms control. It's a very comprehensive document, and when I talk about being comprehensive is because, as I said, it's covering all the arms control functional areas, and by that I mean whether it's legal or legal framework related to firearms, ammunition and explosives, whether it is policy framework in place, meaning strategies and action plans, whether it is looking at the aspects of prevention and countering of trafficking of firearms, ammunition and explosives, looking at aspects of voluntary surrender, legalization, deactivation of firearms as means of reducing the firearms in illegal possessions from the civilian population, whether it is increasing the security or safety of the storages of both law enforcement and armed forces, or destroying, reducing either the surpluses or stock or confiscated firearms, ammunition, and explosives. So the regional documents contains actually concrete commitments covering all these areas. And another element that actually emphasizes its nature of being comprehensive is because it's a regional document that, it was mentioned earlier, it does not cover only firearms, but it covers firearms, their ammunition, but also explosives in its entirety. It has also 13 key performance indicators, and I think this was also pioneering from this region with the governments in the Western Balkans committing to also report annually on these key performance indicators, with concrete timelines and also overall targets. The roadmap implementation has entered now in the second phase of implementation, but through very concrete evaluations that has been actually implemented following the implementation of the first phase of the roadmap. We can already see the impact that this regional document has had not only in the region per se, in the jurisdictions that are implementing this document, but also beyond. With the adoption of the regional roadmap in the Western Balkans, other regions followed. We have already at least two actually roadmaps that have been already adopted. One is the Caribbean Firearms Roadmap, and the other one is the roadmap of Central America and Dominican Republic. I think even in the recent month, the Andean community also announced the initiation of their work on the, let's say, development and adoption of a roadmap. There are some concrete efforts also in Southeast Asia as well in developing such regional document with shared commitments. What I can mention also that as tangible results already that we have seen from the development of the roadmap in the Western Balkans, first of all, is the strengthened cooperation and coordination at the regional level, but also at the jurisdiction level. With the adoption of the roadmap, each of the jurisdictions in the Western Balkans actually developed strategic documents and action plans in the implementation of the roadmap. In addition, it improved the interinstitutional coordination and monitoring mechanisms that are established in each of the jurisdictions, actually for the implementation of the small arms and light weapon strategies. This region is also pioneering these interinstitutional coordination mechanisms that have been very crucial in the success, actually, of this strategic approach, both at the jurisdiction level and at the regional level, because these have ensured also the national ownership. That is also a very key word for the implementation of the roadmap. It's these small arms and light weapons commissions that are deciding on the priorities for action, are the ones who are monitoring, who are coordinating all the activities at the jurisdiction level. What we have seen also is a strengthened cooperation at the regional level. So we say that a firearm, it's not the problem. A firearm stolen in one country is not the problem of that country alone. So that the solution also cannot be also in the hands of that country alone. What the shared commitment and the, let's say, the common targets have also supported is the standardization of the approaches as well as, let's say, legal and policy commitments throughout the region. If one country has very strict legal framework when it comes to firearms and the neighboring country is very loose, does that not help that country either? Because firearms also circulate from one country to another and from one region to another. And of course, and the let's say the loopholes that are created in one country will be used by the criminals. What we have seen also is the strengthened political commitment around this concrete document and increased strengthened compliance with the international treaties, actually. From the start of the implementation of the roadmap, I can mention that at least 3 jurisdictions in the Western Balkans now have full compliance with the UN Firearms Protocol. All the jurisdictions throughout the region are working towards harmonization with the EU directives and regulation, as well as harmonization with the Arms Trade Treaty. I think the region is also one with the highest reporting rate when it comes to the UN Program of Action. And that is my next point, that is transparency. It was also mentioned earlier. It has significantly increased also transparency throughout the region in this specific area. All the jurisdictions with the adoption of this regional document committed to report regularly, and that means biannually providing detailed narrative reports on the implementation of the roadmap, as well as annually with specific key performance indicators that they commonly agreed and they commonly jointly developed, and that they have been reporting since 2018. And I can also mention here that in particular when it comes to the key performance indicators framework, and one of the other influences of this roadmap is that the key performance indicators were later adopted also in the EU Firearms Action Plan 2020-2025. If you see those key performance indicators in the EU Action Plan, these are a mirror of the Western Balkans roadmap key performance indicators, actually. And we have been receiving their reports on annual basis so far. So these are some of the key elements that I think when it comes to the success of the roadmap of the small arms and light weapons control roadmap in the Western Balkans has influenced, and why we think it's been a very success story. And most importantly also because the impact of the roadmap, it's not on small arms and light weapons control only, but goes beyond, in particular when it comes to the security environment throughout the region. I will leave it to this, and then if there is more questions, I can answer.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And before we go to our final presentation, all our speakers have given beautiful arcs in their briefs, and we want to make sure that we also bring all of you in. So get your questions ready. I will surrender my chair's prerogative of asking questions for now, just to be sure that you can all be included. And with that, Karina, please.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah? Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Alexander, and to my friends here. You have given me lots of ideas, but also, especially from here, I want to learn more about what's going on with the success of the roadmaps, because I'm also following the one in the Caribbean and in Central America as well. So I just wanted to start with the not so pessimistic but not optimistic panorama either. And I will have to agree with many of the previous speakers today that the international system that we are witnessing today is at highly strained, and the Arms Trade Treaty is no exception. If you were asking me, would a treaty like the ATT be negotiated and adopted today, I would probably say no, because that's the geopolitical moment that we are living. However, I'm very happy that this treaty was negotiated many years ago. It took 7 years of negotiations, starting in 2006, up until its adoption at the General Assembly in 2013 and entering into force in 2014. And this treaty, despite being sometimes cataloged as either a disarmament treaty or an arms control treaty, is neither. Because it's a regulatory treaty. It's the first international instrument that regulates and sets standards for responsible arms transfers of conventional weapons, including small arms and light weapons. So the weapons that are being covered by the ATT are the typical 7 categories under UN-ROCA, plus small arms and light weapons. This also poses a challenge because, as Manu said, there was something left out in the negotiation. It was very difficult to include ammunition back in the day. And so the global framework on ammunition, in a way, takes a little bit of that weight that was not possible back in 2012 and 2013 during the 2 rounds of negotiations of the treaty. So the transfers that are regulated by the treaty are only for conventional arms and small arms and light weapons. And the treaty, in a way, it's groundbreaking because it seeks to establish these regulations with a very humanitarian purpose at the end of the day, which is to reduce human suffering. So this component, bearing in mind, because some of the articles and the operative articles of the treaty have to do with this. In particular, and I'm thinking when we compare, for instance, to Ottawa and cluster munitions, the ATT doesn't prohibit the production of weapons, right? We wouldn't be here. It doesn't prohibit the distribution of weapons. But what it does prohibit under Article 6, and this is very, very relevant, is that the weapons, and in this case it includes ammunitions and parts and components, Article 6 and Article 7, that these weapons should not be transferred if there is evidence that these weapons could be used for the commission of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Okay, that's Article 6.3. It's an explicit prohibition of the treaty. No other treaty has this provision. Another prohibition under Article 6 has to do with the prohibition of transferring weapons, parts and components, and ammunition if these transfers are in violations of arms embargoes, UN security arms embargoes. So that's another very concrete way in which the treaty seeks to establish these standards and regulate the conventional trade in small arms and light weapons and conventional weapons. Another thing that the treaty is groundbreaking, and it takes this pretty much from the EU experience, is the fact that states under Article 7 have to conduct risk assessments prior to authorizing the transfer of weapons, again, parts and components and ammunition. So let's say under Article 6 you didn't find any evidence that there was an ongoing violation of international law, humanitarian law, Geneva Conventions, and there are no violations of arms embargoes. A state, an exporting state, still has to conduct that specific assessment. If there's no evidence that these weapons could help to commit or facilitate violations of international law, humanitarian law, or gender-based violence, then the sale or the transfer or the issuing of the license can happen. Another interesting thing about the ATT also is that because back in the day, there was no agreement into the definition and the inclusion of illegal trafficking in weapons, the way around for this was to include an article on diversion. And it's also one of the objectives of the treaty, right? To prevent the illicit trafficking in weapons and prevent its diversion. So Article 11, in that sense, although it doesn't necessarily define what diversion means, it calls states to cooperate and to exchange information on diversion. And I know that this is a big issue in Latin America, where I come from. We have seen recently the case of Rio de Janeiro, where the Comando Vermelho fought with the police with weapons that were weapons from the stockpiles from the Argentinian army. And I'm an Argentinian, I'm saying this, and it's very shameful to say it, but that's how diversion occurs. And we have many other examples. In many of the work that I do these days, thanks to the European Union support in Africa, many of the discussions take place is around diversion and the expectation that the treaty sets for states that have no systems whatsoever to be able to fight diversion or to prevent diversion. And that's where one of the challenges comes, right? The levels of implementation of this beautiful treaty are very uneven because the developed states, the EU, Canada, let's say Australia, New Zealand, even China as a state party, they already had existing systems when they joined the ATT. The majority of the countries in the Global South did not, with a few exceptions, maybe Brazil, Argentina, because they had some sort of exporting capabilities. But the rest had to build from scratch. They have to adapt legislation that is very old. In Africa, the majority of the countries are still dealing with firearms laws from the 60s, and they haven't been able to harmonize that and to domesticate that legislation for the ATT. So this is a real challenge, the uneven in implementation. So some countries are very good at implementing the treaty, and we know now examples, concrete examples of how in the Western Balkans countries are implementing correctly, but some others are struggling, and that's where international assistance and coordination and cooperation is very relevant. I would say that the second challenge that we face, and this is something that many mention, I used to mention it as also a criticism when I was not the head of the Secretariat, but I was still working for the ATT, is the uneven universalization. So one of the main criticisms about the ATT is that who's out? Russia and the United States. So the two largest exporters of weapons in the world are outside the treaty. And so for the ones that are seeking to join the treaty but are still unsure about the treaty, that's normally what they bring. They say, well, but the main exporters are not part of the treaty. So why should I, limit myself, and join a treaty when there are no, big powers within the treaty? Also, who is not part of the treaty? The largest importers of weapons. They are neither part of the treaty. And in their case, it's interesting because I think that what's going on, it's not only the geopolitical dynamics that you might have in the South Pacific or in South Asia in general, but it's also this idea that it's a preconceived idea, I would say, that the treaty might limit the ability to purchase weapons. When in reality, what it does is to make sure that when you do purchase, you do it responsibly, right? That there are observations of legal assessments and that your national control list is ready and it's good to acquire those weapons and that you have good record-keeping systems and etc. So there's a list of things that might prepare a country to become a state party, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will limit the ability of a country to procure weapons. And so I think, this is something that for us at the ATT is a big challenge to sort of dispel the myth that we are coming after the weapons of someone, and that's not true. In reality, I think there are many benefits to become part of the treaty, and one of those is precisely the possibility of participating in markets that otherwise would have been closed if you are outside the treaty. And I would say that the third challenge, and it's an important one, and you mentioned something about transparency, is also transparency. One of the main obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty is that states have to report. This is not UN ROCA, this is not UN POA, this is not a political commitment. This is an obligation under the ATT. States have to report on their annual arms exports and imports every year. And so what we have seen in recent years, and especially since and Nick and I worked together in the past, and we used to look at this data, is how transparency has been decreasing since the war against the war in Ukraine. And not because states are trying to hide information. I think it's because the information is so sensitive that many countries don't know how to navigate what is it that they can publicize or not publicize in terms of transfers. Europe is a really good example anyways. In general, it has a really good record on transparency, and I think this is one of, going back to your point of what is it that the EU can do, is continue working by setting the example, which is don't fall in your reporting obligations, because unfortunately many of the EU member states are falling and are declining in their reporting obligations. And also set the example that the European Union has developed really good systems for reporting that can be easily translated with a quote here, but regionalized to the specific needs of other countries. Many countries in the global south are very reluctant, again, because of the myth of disclosing sensitive information. They're very reluctant to report their arms imports, especially, not exports. I mean, there's not many exports in Africa and Latin America, but especially imports. Because again, they think, well, my neighbor will know what I buy. And we always say, your neighbor will know anyways, because CIPRI publishes the information, right? The information is out there. Today, the information is out there. There's no way around, unless it's a secret military agreement, the information will be out there. So I want to leave it with those specific challenges, and happy to continue the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those rich discussions, presenting a really big menu for follow-on questions from the audience. The way we'll do this is that if you have a question or a very short comment, feel free to raise your hand. I will see you somewhere beyond the glare. For instance, I see someone in the background there. The microphone will come to you if you could identify yourself and who the question is addressed to on the panel, or whether it's for everyone. Thank you.
My name is Lucas Mengelkamp. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg, and I have a question for Nicholas. I was wondering what role military strategy and doctrine plays in your thinking. So, because, I mean, if we think about reductions in conventional arms across the board, that depending on the reductions can also be bad for crisis stability. And so we also have to think about these soft factors like doctrines and military strategy and how they influence crisis stability. And yeah, I was wondering if you also think about that, because you, as far as I understand, mostly mentioned rather quantitative limits. Thank you very much.
I believe I saw another question back in that corner as well, if the microphone's already there.
Thank you very much. My name is Marek Madej. I'm from University of Warsaw, Poland, and I would like to be a bit encouraged by Nicholas Marsh. I'll try to be also a bit provocative, because Mr. Emmanuel Miralles listed challenges, and the first of that challenge was the blurring line between loitering munition, drone ammunition, and so on. And it's good to have, let's say, diagnosis that's the problem, but what are the solutions? And for example, why, correct me if I'm wrong, but global ammunition framework does not include any mentioning concerning loitering munition and so on. So why not to think about, let's say, implementing that kind of elements into mechanisms which are new? Because otherwise we produce something which is to some degree outdated at the moment of arrival. And at the same time, we are not dealing with the issue which is quickly increasing. I'm fully aware of the, let's say, international climate we have, and also I'm fully aware of the problem with defining what exactly is ammunition in this context, although it's more blurred than in fact it could be. it's blurred to some degree intentionally. But nevertheless, can we think about it in more innovative way as far as we developing relatively new mechanism, to what degree it could be included? Otherwise, we will only have a diagnosis that it's a problem, but with no, let's say, any concrete steps to solve it. Thank you.
I see our third and final question for this round.
Thank you very much. My name is Ursula Caturla. I'm a nuclear lawyer from Peru, but I'm based here in Brussels. I was very curious about the mention of the Andean Community Roadmap that was mentioned by Ms. Juliana Busi. So this is something that is very relevant to my region of the world. And I am curious as to what are the tangible outcomes that are expected with the adoption of this roadmap, and what are the concrete steps that member states within the Andean community and the OAS and with the help of the UNIREC, which is also based in Lima, Peru, where I'm from, can take in order to make sure that this remains not only a political commitment or a mere political commitment, but actually a document with tangible results. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So let us start with the question on strategy and doctrine, and go to Nick for that.
Thanks very much. That's an excellent question. I haven't written about this, but it's a really good subject. And certainly, if you're looking at trying to reduce tensions, trying to build in some stability, then looking at doctrine, strategy, would be very important. And certainly, if we, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Cold War. I guess there's a few other of us. There was lots of talk at the time of non-offensive defense in terms of how to deter an opponent, but use doctrine and strategy in such a way that it was not going to be seen as being offensive, try to avoid the security dilemma. So that's an excellent point. And also, sort of building on that, it would be very important in terms of a conventional arms control, just looking at units, etc., or even production, to try and avoid that in itself being destabilizing. I mean, you need to avoid a situation in which you're, creating an opportunity for somebody to attack you. That goes without saying, really. And also, a point of conventional arms control would be to try to build confidence. As I said, try to look at something that's easier before we move on to the nuclear element. And certainly, we could imagine, discussions on strategy and doctrine being part of those confidence-building discussions if they might arise.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I think I will address the question on the scope of the global framework on ammunition. On that one, what I can say is that states dedicated lengthy discussions over several years on defining the scope. And the scope is very clear. It says it covers all types of ammunition, from the small caliber ammunition to the largest ammunition system. So that means that it has a way, let's say, broad scope of application. And the beauty of the structure of the framework is that it addresses both security and safety dimensions. The core of the framework relates to preventing diversion and illicit trafficking of ammunition to unauthorized users. But the fact that there's at least three objectives, 5 to 7, dealing with safety of ammunition, it literally means that everything that is explosive is covered under the framework of ammunition. And this is quite interesting politically, because the Global South, Latin America, African countries, the Caribbean, were very, very keen to have small caliber ammunition reflected in the text. But on the contrary, let's say major military powers wanted to have the largest caliber systems, in the sense that it will contribute to reduce the safety risks, the unplanned explosions at munition sites, including their own stockpiles, which is a danger and a risk that is faced by all states. So I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to chat also on the sides on the implementation of the framework. It's my favorite subject.
Thank you, Juliana. I think you had a question directed straight to you.
I can respond, but Manuel, if you want to also, if you have more information on that one, because I think it was in the recent month that there was at the Permanent Council, I think, of the Organization of American States that requested and mandated the Secretariat of the Organization of American States in coordination with UNLIREC, actually, and the member countries of the Andean community to start to initiate development of this firearms roadmap. But it's interesting for me, it was interesting to see also that this, at least from the title, to see that it will be also all-inclusive, including firearms, ammunition, and explosives as well. Which is very important because it's not easy, it's a complex one, so to actually cover all three. And I forgot to mention in the Western Balkans, when we talk about explosive, we talk explosive for civil use, but also explosive precursors, which is actually another very important but also very complex topic.
Thank you. I'll try to complement. I think you already answered fully, but I think in your question there was an angle on how to ensure practical implementation. And I will go back to Juliana's point on the very key feature that makes the roadmaps, the one in the Western Balkans, the one in the Caribbean, the one in Central America, very different to previous initiatives at the regional level, is the monitoring and evaluation mechanism, the indicators. And those indicators are very specific. They can address very technical areas in the control of small arms and light weapons, like the effectiveness of your systems when it comes to physical security or stockpile management, or what type of record-keeping systems you have, how your legislation addresses transfers or registration of civilian possession. It is very, very, very granular in detail. And I think having that monitoring system and what Juliana was describing as the elaboration of the national action plan to meet those indicators is what makes it operational and actually tangible. I think another interesting aspect of the roadmaps is how themselves are a tool to build capacity and to build the strength into the governance and the institutions with roles and responsibilities over arms and ammunition to actually deliver on those technical areas. So it's very promising. The way in which these roadmaps are developed is in the hands of the states that form part of the roadmap, and it takes time. It's, I mean, I cannot remember how long it took in the Western Balkans, but it's, if not months, years process into agreeing how the roadmap is going to work, and then implementation starts. That's just the beginning.
Just very briefly, 1 minute only. Yes, on that point actually, because it actually took only 6 months for the Western Balkans jurisdictions to negotiate and to agree to, but it took 20 years of work before that. Cooperating together, working together, actually to get to that one. So actually agreeing on a regional action plan came as the natural step afterwards. And that after the monitoring, the national ownership is actually the key to also practicality and implementation as well. They are engaged from the very beginning to the end of actually of the process. In every step of the process, they in the development, in the implementation, in the monitoring. So I think that's another guarantee.
Just to quickly add to the colleague from Peru, there's actually also a mandate by the OAS, I think just recently, to start developing a firearms roadmap for the Andean region as well. So it will take the example of the Central American and the Caribbean roadmap. And something interesting that you brought as an issue, which has to do not only with implementation, but sort of, you know, the political linkages and practicalities, is that the objective number 4 of the roadmaps in general in the Caribbean, I don't know if in the Balkans it's the same, but it has to do with the prevention of diversion. And so if you want to look into the linkages with other conventional arms agreements, you know, that's where the dialogue can begin. Because in reality, you know, the Latin American region with the problem that they have with firearms, that's where the dialogue takes place. When you say ATT, they're like, psst, no, it's not my problem, right? Because they still see it as something, you know, super high but bringing down the diversion aspect of the firearms roadmaps into the conversation, I think it's an area that, at least from the Secretariat, we are starting to explore how to engage, in this dialogue and see if through assistance and capacity building, we can also help the region to navigate this.
We would have time for 2 more crisp questions, if you have those available. Yes, I see a question over in this direction.
Hello, I'm Dafina Aliou. I'm one of the mentees from the mentorship program from VCDMP. I had a question regarding the ATT treaty and regarding the assessment criteria under Article 7. Is there a general, a specific assessment framework that countries have to comply with? Because as I see it, it actually, since it can be quite ambiguous on how different states can frame the assessment, and this can lead, let's say, for them to avoid their responsibility to do this in order to comply with the Article 6 of the treaty.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yes, right the row behind.
Thank you very much. My name is Dean Jacquemin. I work for the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Small Arms. I have a question. How to bring technical expertise in all those fora, because especially for the POA and the ITI. Of course, you will tell me that there is the UATEG that will take place next year. That's 3 days in informal. We'll see how that happens. But we've been trying for 10 years to actually bring technical experts and have a technical discussion. And it took so long because, it's not only from, we've been asking for this technical discussion on new technologies for, I think, since 2010, I think. And so it took so long to have a real technical discussion. And I wasn't there in 2001 when the POA was adopted, but I had the feeling that there was a real push also from researchers, from technical experts with the GG on small arms and light weapons to actually come from have a real discussion on technical issues, and then that would be translated into political commitments. And I don't know how to restart this issue with this drive with a real technical discussion from industry, from specialists in tracing, and then have a real political discussion.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're getting very close to dinner time, so I will just ask the panelists to keep around the 30-second mark, and we will walk down the panel in this direction.
Okay, very, very quickly, and I'm glad you asked that question, because as any treaty, the treaty doesn't necessarily establish a full procedure for risk assessment. It only mentions, that a state needs to take into account whether there is a possibility that certain crimes can be committed, and based on that, see if there are any mitigation measures that the state can take to prevent the commission of these crimes. And there is a final process by which, if this exporting state believes that there is an overriding risk that these weapons could be used to commit or facilitate crimes, then the authorization should be denied. That's what the treaty says. There's a lot of guidance that has been developed over years, including the new guidelines from the European Union as well, that are a model for how to structure a risk assessment process. But it's actually a very national. It is a national prerogative. We can only sort of guide states on how to do it. But yeah, it could be that anyone understands differently what it is that they need to look at.
And gentlemen, 30 seconds, please.
30 seconds. Okay, I'll answer the question on how to bring technical expertise to the open and the technical expert group. There are different ways in which we can try to do that. Of course, it's going to be a national prerogative, the type of expertise that will join the delegation to take part into those conversations, and being present in New York is a factor for many countries. So there are things that we are trying to do to improve the technical expertise in the room. One, obviously, is with support from the European Union. We are running a sponsorship program to bring technical experts, but of course that's limited. We don't have endless funding to be flying experts to the meetings. However, if there are states here present that are interested in chipping in that sponsorship program, this is a fantastic opportunity to come and talk to me. Then we are also building the substance with the webinars that actually you were participating a week ago, and we were listening in from the Africa Fellowship program when you presented, and we're trying to build that virtually, so the positions by member states are, let's say, informed by the technical expertise shared through webinars. And that's something that we are doing along with our colleagues in UNIDIR. And we, of course, have the chair's prerogative to bring experts to actually address the conference. And that's something that we will do, or that we will advise the chair as secretariat to particularly bring industry experts, which is much needed in these technical conversations. Thank you so much.
Yeah, in the final 30 seconds. No, that was an excellent question about the ATT. And as I'm the one panelist who doesn't work for an international organization, I can say that a lot of ATT states parties are not living up to their responsibilities under the treaty, especially regarding Article 6, Article 7, you mentioned the risk assessments, but there's also the prohibitions that Karina mentioned as well. Manu mentioned Sudan. There's a very serious conflict going on in Sudan. Some of the arms flowing into Sudan, were coming from European Union member states. They're not going directly. They're being organized by the United Arab Emirates in particular, but these armed flows are following pretty well-established, pretty well-known routes. So it's not the case that nobody has any idea what's going on, but still, it keeps happening, and we really should be doing better.
Thank you all so much. I think we've all received a lot of food for thought, but what we really want now is food for eating. So I will refrain from offering a summary. This is the first day of a wonderful conference. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk to the panel in the future. The only thing that I would ask of you is that you will join me in a round of applause for this absolutely phenomenal panel.